So I'm Aust Neferka, and my lovely co-host is Danny. Want to introduce
Hello,
yourself?
blessings.
Okay, so for those of you who have migrated over from Instagram, welcome. For those who are watching our Navigating Eternity Ancient Astrology live stream series for the first time, then welcome. We have been doing our series on Instagram, and now we just migrated over to YouTube. So the first 4 episodes are actually on Instagram. So if you actually want to get caught up with a lot of the introductory elements that we already covered, then you can definitely check us out on Instagram. And all of our links are in the description. So you can click the link in the description to follow Tehuti Ma'at, and the Navigating Eternity series is on our Reels. So since some people may be here for the first time, this is our first time streaming on YouTube, I think it would be great for us to just introduce ourselves. So, Danny, would you do us the honors and introduce yourself first?
Hey, bless everyone. As you know, my name is Danny. I am a cosmologist and a multidisciplinary artist. I'm here to assist with the return to oneness as we exist together on this planet, and astrology helps me do that. So I'm here to talk with you about how that is done.
And I am Asna Farka. I'm the mother of Tehuti Ma'at. I'm a spiritual warrior. I'm a sacred wisdom keeper. So a lot of my astrological or astronomical or cosmological perspective of how we look at the vastness of the universe, of the cosmos, and internalize that is coming from that cosmic worldview of our ancient African ancestors, specifically our Kemetic ancestors, which many people know as ancient Egyptian, which is called Kemet, right? That location, that particular geographical location, the Nile Valley, or what our ancestors called the Happy Valley, was considered to be Kemet. That was the name of the land. So I think it's very important for us to start honoring a lot of the ancient origins of all of these things. So Danny and I are actually part of Tehuti Ma'at, and this revolutionary instrument focuses on creating institutions that are revolutionary, that can bring forward the African world revolution. So we're really focusing on doing the educational work to bring people back to the origins that come from Africa. So we're going to talk a lot about that today as we connect what we usually read through the European, the Greek, the Roman interpretations, and we're going to orient ourselves back to the motherland and to the original interpretations that our ancestors had for these energies, which gives us a more holistic approach to the energies and how we actually sense and feel and embody them in our lives. So I want to welcome everybody who is here live. If you are here live, we want to ask you to engage with us in the chat. So you can go ahead and comment, and we'll definitely answer any questions that you have. So shout out to our brother Omawali Africa, who's also a member of the Tehutima Militia. So welcome. And anyone else who's here, just shout out who you are, where you're from, and we will gladly answer any questions that you put in the chat. So without further ado, we're actually going to share our new introduction. So we're going to have to get some like cosmic sounds to go along with our Navigating Eternity intro. Okay. So, Danny, today we have a very specific theme. We're talking about the lunar nodes shifting into Amun and Ma'at, or what most people know as Aries and Libra. So our focus is really seeing how it's going to practically apply to us, which is really going to shift us into self-acceptance through our connections and our relationships. So I know that one of the things that we talked about before is that we want to talk about what the lunar nodes are so that we can actually share that with people who may not be familiar with what these points are, because they're not actual luminaries or planets, right? They're specific ecliptic points, right? So the lunar nodes, we're going to introduce what the lunar nodes are. And then also we're going to start by having a reflective, retrospective look at the lunar nodes and think about what actually just transpired as the lunar nodes just transitioned from where they were. So they go through these 18 moon cycles, right? 18 months. And then the lunar nodes shift. So, Danny, I'm going to go ahead and give you the mic. For those, what's your take on, what the lunar nodes are? Because I think it's a beautiful thing, because I've actually watched like a lot of different astrologers and different people talking about this particular shift, because it is so significant and everyone seems to kind of describe it in their own way. So I would love to hear your own take on the lunar nodes.
Yes. So the way that I digest the lunar nodes is that I look at it as that image of the dragon eating its own tail. So the head and the tail of the dragon, the head being the north node, the tail being the south node, they're interconnected, and they're both asking us to evaluate these specific energetic signatures within ourselves and how we address them with clarity and accountability in our lives. So the north node would be where we are ushered towards, and the south node would be where we are coming from. So the south node is always asking us to unload, and the north node is asking us to pack in. So we're collecting the lessons of the north node and we're letting go of the lessons of the south node. So essentially, the north node is always bringing us more things into our magnetic field to highlight whatever energy it's occupying in its sign, whereas the south node is highlighting where we may be clinging on too tightly to the energy that is in the south node sign. So coming from the axis of Taurus and Scorpio, which is where we've been for the past 18 months, ever since July 17th, I believe, it switched to Aries and Libra. We've been ushered towards looking at ownership through the essence of Taurus being the north node. Ownership and the way that we delegate finances, or the way that we delegate practicality. And we've had to let go of or address a relationship that is not beneficial to us through the essence of Scorpio, which is merging and creation and the energy of sex, and what happens when two becomes one, and all of the different taboo things that happen when we merge with another, and how we have to metamorphosize through that connection. So we've had to gain lessons as far as how to recalibrate and reorientate ourselves around the essence of Scorpio. And we've had to lean more towards what Taurus has to offer to bring balance to the two energies, so that we can move forth into where we're at now, Aries and Libra. So I think that the north node and the south node, they're representations of the collective subconscious and the spaces that we're occupying within the space that we're connected to, but we all see it differently through our personal lives.
Yeah, and then the astronomy of it is really significant too, because I think about how when we're moving through our solar system, right, everything is kind of on its own plane. And it's not like this flat, linear, okay, each planet rotates and revolves in the same way. It's actually like a 360-degree experience. So the lunar nodes are very significant because they're focused on that particular plane that the moon is rotating around us and how it's connecting to our revolution around Ra, the sun. So it's a very significant expression of energy because it's kind of like this merging point, essentially, which is beautiful how you expressed that in your lens through looking at the Kemetef. The Kemetef is what you described, the Aurora Boreas, the serpent usually shown swallowing its own tail, like as an essence of eternity, which is the essence of the cosmos, is there is no end, there is no beginning, or the beginning is the end. And it's like that cyclical expression of eternity. So it is very significant because I know a lot of people know about the Sanskrit interpretation and that being depicted as the head and the tail of the dragon. So I think it's interesting to look at it from an ancient Kemetic perspective, the Kemetef, because it actually is usually shown kind of doing a figure 8, which is like the symbol of eternity. So it's like what's behind you or what you're leaving behind, what's in the south node is always going to be the complementary energy on that particular axis. So we've talked before in the episodes that we did on Instagram about how significant it is to look at astrology, ancient astrology, from that cosmic perspective that our ancestors had as holistic. So we're always looking at the complementary energy. We're never just looking at one particular sign or constellation. We're looking at how that energy signature is expressed whole, right, in Ma'at to be balanced, which is interesting because the South Node is in Ma'at. So we'll talk a bit more about what Ma'at is and how that energy presents itself. But I think that that's really important for people to take in, is we never want to isolate necessarily and look at one side of the coin. We always need to balance it with that complementary energy that's the opposite polarity. So the North and South Node do that innately because it's always going to reflect the opposite on the South Node. But what you're leaving behind is actually also what's bringing you forward in that balanced sense. So like what you were just saying about the energies that we were just in. So we're talking about 18 months of being in that energy of allowing the North Node to move through Taurus, which is Api, the bull, right? Which we know bulls are stubborn, and it has that energy signature to it because it's a fixed energy. It's a earth energy as well. And then on the opposite side, as you were talking about, Serket or Scorpio, that being the water sign. And it's interesting because in our ancient tradition, Serket would be considered the feminine and Api would be considered the masculine. So the bull would be the masculine, Taurus, and Scorpio would be the feminine, and the deep waters. And like you were saying, like all that taboo, like the things that we haven't necessarily wanted to deal with. But because that energy is innately transformative, it's transformative with the purpose of centering your self-preservation, right? And again, with all energies, they can express themselves differently. So there's that extreme like overemphasis and the underemphasis. So Serket or Scorpio energy could also be very rooted in survival. Like self-preservation is like it's centered, but when it gets into that survival mode, it can be very cutthroat. It can be very vindictive, right? We have a lot of different traits. I think Scorpio, people usually get that a lot of negative connotations with Scorpio. But can you speak a little bit more about how you see in the past 18 months, or even on a personal note? Because I think I love the fact that we're able to internalize it and embody the energy, because it's not something that's happening outside of us. And I think that that's really important for us to illustrate to people who are learning this. And even if you know about Greek and Roman astrology, like you have to really put yourself in a space of learning and seeing it from a different lens in order to really embrace the ancient wisdom that's really nestled within it, because I find that the Greek and the Roman can be very surface. Even when you go into the depths of it, it's not necessarily surface, maybe straight. It's very straight. So what are your thoughts on how we've been moving through and how we've been embodying that energy of that South Node in Scorpio for the past 18 months, to give people a sense of how the South Node expresses itself, and then we can look forward to how the South Node will express itself now that it's in Ma'at in Libra?
One, it is breaking up for me a little bit. Like, my camera keeps going in and out. So for anyone who's watching, I hope that you can hear me on my end. Please let us know. I'm not sure if there's a comment section in here. But yes. So what you were saying about how we have to process the South Node, which ushers us towards the North Node, how they're complementary energies, just like the complements of the signs that we talk about. I think everything we've experienced with the Taurus and South Node axis is a perfect example of that, because we know Scorpio to be the energy that makes us address our trauma. Scorpio is trauma itself. So when it comes to that aspect of merging, usually we look at when we enter the house of Scorpio or the energy of Scorpio, when Scorpio makes itself known as the energetic space that we're in, we have to address the things that we may like to suppress, the things that we may like to turn our backs to, the things that we may like to forget about or assume that we can forget about, as if energy is just going to dissipate. Scorpio is the energetic signature of reminding us that things have to be transmuted in order for them to be recognized as something different than what it is. So I say that to say, I feel like a huge collective theme, especially coming out of, because the thing with the North Node and the South Node is that the energies are cyclic. Just like the zodiac, we're moving in a circle. So we were once in Gemini and Sagittarius, which we spoke about in a previous live. I think it was like episode 3. The North Node and the South Node was in Gemini and Sagittarius. That was when the whole world went into quarantine, right? When we started getting a whole bunch of information about all of these different ways that we haven't been communicating, or that just like foreign entities and things happening in our neighborhood, we were restricting communication, et cetera, et cetera. And we moved into Taurus and Scorpio. So the remedy for that was entering the body and addressing the body and the sensations and the sensation of being alone, the sensation of being within, the sensation of honoring self-preservation and knowing what it is that you're dealing with. When we talk about Taurus and ownership, it also has to do with the ownership of who you are, because Taurus comes after Aries. So after you have your identity, you now have things that represent your identity, which is Taurus. So with the North Node being in Taurus, the collective had to recognize where our body is still showing us where our trauma is, and noticing the way that our body reacts to the things that we haven't addressed. So an example of that, I would say, with just like looking at things collectively, is one of the best-selling books in the collective during this access, the 18th month.
All right. My apologies, because I see that Danny's camera went out. So what Danny's talking about, though, right now in terms of like the 18-month cycle and us looking back. Oh, there she goes.
I'm back. Sorry. I hope it doesn't do it again. If it does it again, I'm just going to change locations and go inside where there's Wi-Fi. But I'm on the roof and it should be fine. I paid my phone bill. So but yes, what I was saying is that one of the best-selling books that was on the shelves was The Body Keeps Score, which is essentially a book that a psychologist wrote about veterans who were in war and how they went through their mental therapeutic sessions, but at the end of the day, when they returned home, they were still constantly triggered by all of the trauma from the war. So they were able to collect data about how our body and different body parts absorb our traumatic experiences, and that can be accounted for in the things that reignite that memory as far as sensations. So they were doing tests on these veterans by showing them images of something like it would be a black dot, and the veteran would look at the black dot, but their mind would formulate some reason or correlation to a traumatic experience they had in the war, rather than just seeing.
I think we lost Danny again. But yes, that is so interesting. It's not crazy, it's divine though. You did just send me that book. And it's very interesting that when I think about a lot of the energies that have been common in the collective, like even thinking about a lot of the talk right now about sexuality, gender, um, child trafficking, pornography, like a lot of these issues are now like really coming to surface, and we're seeing like the seriousness of the research, right? The science that's really reinforcing the need for healing around a lot of these different themes. So all of that was really that 18-month cycle of the South Node in Serket. Because remember, the South Node is also dealing with that lower octave of the energy that's there. So we're talking about, oh, and another aspect of the cycle that I think is really important that's like beyond, like something that we just have to kind of zoom out, and I want to make sure that everyone really processes, is the fact that when we're looking at the ecliptic and the cycle of energy that we're moving through astrologically, when we, like what we call the zodiac, whether we're looking at the Greek zodiac, the Kemetic interpretation of the zodiac, or anything, we're always going through this cycle of energy, dealing with these particular constellations and these particular themes and archetypes. And usually we're going in one direction. We're starting at Aries and we're ending at Pisces, right? Now, it's interesting because the lunar nodes, or what can also be called the nodes of fate, right? Because this is where the energy is directing you. It's like innately. And the reason why they're considered to be the nodes of fate is really because the cycle is moving backwards, which is actually mirroring the larger scope of what is actually happening in the cosmos, which is that 226,000 year revolution that we're having on a more galactic level, right? When we're zooming out. So that's the calendar, and that's the zodiac that is in Dendera, right? In Kemet, in Africa, carved into stone that we can see to this day, right? It's this bigger procession of the equinoxes is what it's called. And these larger cycles. And that's what you usually hear people talking about when they say, oh, we entered the age of Hapi, the age of Aquarius, right? Hapi is the ancient interpretation of the energy, the water bearer, right? Hapi was actually the energy and the vibration used for the Nile, the longest river, or maybe we could say one of the longest rivers, but really the only river that flows from south to north on our planet. So it is very significant what that river and that flow of water represents, and how we've moved into that era, but we moved out of the age of Pisces. So instead of us going into from Pisces to Aries, we went in the opposite direction, which is exactly what the lunar nodes do, but on a micro orbit, right? So it's like a microscopic expression of this larger procession of the equinoxes that happen. So that's why it's considered to be the nodes of fate, because it's ultimately directing us on a micro level emotionally to this larger cosmic movement that's happening. and it's going in that direction instead of the direction that we're normally moving through as the moon moves through the zodiac, or as the sun moves through the zodiac every revolution. So that's something that I think is also really significant. I also want to welcome everybody who is live to ask any questions and engage with us in the chat. And we will gladly answer any questions that you have. So I'm hoping Danny, I know she has to transition to a different location so that she can get a stronger connection. But for the most part, we're just looking at, in retrospect, how we've moved through this energy. So we just talked about that Scorpio energy, dealing with a lot of the taboo things, a lot of the things we want to bury. That Scorpio Circuit energy is very much about digging to the depths of the ocean. That's why it's those things you don't really want to talk about. We don't really want to talk about abortions. We don't really want to talk about these really painful sores within the collective that have been surfacing up, right? Because the circuit energy is always going to bring the deep depths of the emotions up to the surface to be transformed. Ultimately, that's the purpose of it. So we've all been moving through these opportunities for these deep rooted traumas or deep rooted pains to come forward in order to be felt and processed. Now, granted, everybody's not necessarily embracing that, right? So it just depends on how you choose to embody the energy, engage with the energy, or in some cases resist the energy. Because when people do choose to resist the energy, do choose to escape, do choose to go deeper into those patterns, that creates a completely different dynamic, right? And that's why we also have cycles of karma, right? The karmic reality is we're always going to reap what we sow. So we either recycle back around and contract in order to learn more, or we cycle and expand out of those patterns and cycles so that we can grow and continue to revolve, right? And I make a huge emphasis on the and distinction between revolving and evolving, right? That shifts us from that Eurocentric paradigm. The evolving is linear, and the revolving is that spiral of expansion that is going to take us beyond, right? It's usually what a lot of people mean when they're saying evolve, but what we don't recognize is that's usually predicated on a thought process that expresses itself in a way that it's always going up, but really the way that we grow is we go up and we go down and come back around. So energy is always going to cycle itself. It's not always going to be progressive in that way where it's like always climbing up this ladder. So that's really important as well to take into consideration. So that's the purpose of even knowing consciously the energy cycles and the astrology. Excuse me. The energy cycles and the astrology. Oh, just seen Danny coming back. Welcome back.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm in a coffee shop now.
So I was just expressing a lot around just the lower octave of circuit energy, how we usually express it. And I also touched on how the nodes of fate and their rotation is a microcycle of the precession of the equinoxes, which also goes in the opposite direction of the zodiac wheel. So I don't know if there was anything, I know you were in the middle of speaking about how it's expressed in the collective. So if there's anything else that you want to add about that, but we could also just shift into talking about the North Node in Api, Taurus, and how that expressed itself in the previous 18 months.
Yeah, so I think we can transition to talking about the North Node. I think an essential aspect to what we all experience with North Node and Taurus that we could all digest and see in oneness is the fact that we all had to reevaluate what is valuable and understand that nothing is worth the cost of our freedom. I think a lot of people collectively, globally, on many accounts, for many different reasons, had to shift their perspective on what they were giving and what they were receiving specifically in the realm of the workforce, and reevaluating what they're willing to do for money, and having many different, because Taurus rules money. So Venus rules over.
What is money? Like the actual currency shifting, the conversation around the currency shifting, how we value money itself in a physical, tangible way, moving into digital currency. So all of those things are also expressions of the North Node.
Right, and even that, yeah, like you were saying, digitizing money. So making people look at like, oh, okay, I'm working so hard and giving my entire life force away for this physical entity that now I am being revealed has no value. So I think we all had to recalibrate what value actually means when it comes to what we're extending our life force energy towards, and how that's being echoed in our experience of life. So really coming back to abundance and not thinking about money as a physical entity that we have to seek and search and exert so much for, but actually looking at how to make do with what we have, and then allow that gratitude. So coming back to energy, which I think is that polarity of Scorpio, because when we talk about water, we're talking about the unseen, and we're talking about the the wave that creates the frequency that creates the physicality. So I think that that's the water and earth complementary experience, that how our emotional reality is creating what we actually experience in the physical. So the South Node in Scorpio was asking us to address our relationship with loss and our relationship with lack, which is usually a pillar that Scorpio has to go through so that they can explore the depths of what it is their energetic constitution is supposed to experience to illuminate who they are. Um, and then the North Node in Taurus was asking us, okay, now that you understand loss, what are you going to do with what you have? And collectively, that looked like many people realizing that they don't want to continue living in a paradigm where they have to work extremely hard to have the things that they want to have, that they don't want to continue prioritizing resources that aren't funding their dreams, that they don't want to continue prioritizing working for someone who makes way more than they'll ever see in their life, and they're not even doing the things that they want to do. Like, these are all things that Taurus address, because Taurus is about us utilizing our natural gifts, like the gifts and the skills that we incarnated with, that we can activate if we put in practice, bless you, the practice and the repetition and the structure to actually cultivate a life that allows us to receive for having those gifts. And I think that's a part of the essence of Taurus, and that's what the North Node was ushering us into in a multitude of ways that showed up many different ways for many different people. For me personally, I'm a Libra rising, so I have Taurus in the 8th house. So I'm just coming out of the North Node being in my 8th house. It's now moving into my 7th house. But the 8th house is the Scorpionic house, relating it to a sign. And it is, the 8th house is all about the way that you merge, the way that you experience intimacy, and what you share. It's also about secrets. It's about shared income. It's about income received from another person. So I experienced the North Node in the 8th house, having to look at habits that I cultivated in my childhood that make me overshare, and overshare in ways that I may not be conscious of, which I think is a part of the 8th house, is the things that we leave behind the scenes. It's the parts of us that no one else sees. And when the North Node is there, it asks you to live in those areas, in the places in which you don't want other people to see, and to actually hone in on owning those things so that you can cultivate those as a part of your personality as well. So for me, that looked like utilizing no more often, and also looking at like really taking accountability for how much I value what I do have. So being honest about how I feel about how other people treat what I have, and that not just being physical, which I think is because Taurus is opposite the eighth house, so all of my houses are flipped because I'm a Libra rising. So with the North Node being in Taurus in my eighth house, it wasn't just about physical things, material things, or earthly things. It was about what I share energetically and emotionally, and the way that I merge with other people when I invite them into my life, and learning how to draw a line between what is mine to keep and what is mine to share, and knowing that at the end of the day, I have to have what I have in order for me to operate at my fullest capacity, which I think it goes back to what you were saying about Hapi and its nature to self-preserve.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting, like how you're describing it in relation to your specific astrology and your natal chart. So I think that that's another thing that is important for people to take into consideration is like the depths of how the energy moves through us and affects us, and how all of this is like intricately woven. Because even when I think about like what's the point of all of this, right? Like the universe, nature is very nurturing and very graceful. So it moves through these cycles to allow us to unfold into our growth. It gives us the ease of shifting in this way where it's going through different modalities and different elements to allow us to transform phase by phase by phase. And when I think about everything that you were just saying about Api or Taurus being in the North Node for the past 18 months, we were all being nurtured because Neter, the universe, wants us to see our innate value, to see our worthiness in our own existence. Now, because each of us is experiencing our own ma'at, our own karma, right? Based on our past lives, our past choices and decisions in this life, based on our roots, our lineage, all of those things come into play in terms of why our soul chose to come through with particular placements in order to have specific experiences to grow and to cultivate the spirit. So I think about how that worthiness is a wound that we all have in this age of materialism, right? Because everything is about, looking at the value of the material thing. And Api was taking us to the higher level of that. I feel like the North Node is always taking us to the highest octave of or expression of a particular energy. So it's about that innate value. It's about seeing that our existence is what gives us value, seeing that we are the currency, we are the energy, we are the fuel, we are the flow. So part of that was also for us to navigate how we are valued externally as well. But depending on what position it's in for you, expresses how you're going to experience it. So I'm actually curious to get your interpretation from me. What house was it in from me? The 10th house? Yeah, because I know that my midheaven is also in Api and Taurus. So when I think about that, yeah, for me, a lot of the work that I've been doing around my own value was about coming forward and bringing my value out to the world, as my expression, as my service, as my career, essentially. So that makes complete sense to me as well. So, yeah. I wanted to just lift this comment that came in. Welcome. Thank you for being here. It says allowing the cycle to flow naturally is how we are also able to age gracefully as well. Absolutely. Because when we resist, we're going against the current. So we're just going to waste energy, essentially. So it's like tiring yourself out. Like think about how you look when you look fresh and energized, when you're conserving your energy versus when you're exhausted and you're drained. that's going to express itself on you physically as well. So that's a great point. And Fada also said, she is describing what I am currently going through. I was chasing wealth instead of investing into the wealth within me. Yeah. So
And
that's, go ahead.
I think that apart, like going back to the collective lesson and how we were all cultivating this lesson together, I think that the essential part to the nature of Taurus is being able to slow down. Like Taurus values stillness. So a lot of us were forced or guided into situations in which we needed to slow down and we needed to be still, which is why there was so much loss. Because when you're engaged with so many different sources of stimulation, you're not able to move slow enough to notice in full what you're doing and what is motivating your actions, which I think is a huge part of the lesson of Taurus, because in its lower octave, it wants to accumulate just to accumulate and to have all of its comforts met and all of the things that we know are associated with the earthly side of Venus, which is pleasure, making sure that all pleasures are intact and making sure that that is always accessible. But when you slow down, which is a part of Taurus's lesson, and you learn what your body is telling you, like the person commented, I forgot their name, but like the person commented about the wealth within, when you are able to slow down and acknowledge what you have inside of you, you lose the desire to seek externally those stimulations in order to fill a void that you aren't addressing is there. So I think a huge part of what we had to do is slow down and notice how our nervous system was reacting to our patterns of behavior, our patterns of engaging with life, our patterns of engaging in relationship, and actually see what the nervous system was communicating, which we can really only do in stillness or with a slower nature. So I think that that was like the key to the collective actually reevaluating what our conditioning is when it comes to our concept of abundance, because I think that we're conditioned to think that it's just constant accumulation and that the more you have, the more abundant you are. But really, the real abundance is a calm nervous system, like being comfortable in your body. Right. Because it's not a common experience, you know, like a lot of people are anxiety ridden, a lot of people are completely disappointed in the way that they live their everyday life and many different things. But an overactive nervous system is essentially directly correlated to what we understand to be poverty, and not in the sense of like a lack of physical money, but poverty in the sense of not having enough inner resources to source yourself, which goes back to intuition, which I also think is a part of the Taurus lesson, which is why Taurus and Scorpio, they're both energies connected to the womb. And we also know that the Buddha, the whole story of the Buddha was a Taurus, and all of those things being connected as far as being able to listen to the voice within and allowing that to motivate the way that you exercise your gifts and how you cultivate your expression of yourself in your life and the work that you choose to do and the way that you engage with the material reality and what that means to you and how you engage with your physicality and how you harness or allow pleasure, because a lot of people think, I think this is another point, that you can only experience pleasure after working. Like I forgot what that saying is, but it's like basically like work hard, play after, something like that. I forget the saying, but how like this reward system. What'd you say? You're on mute.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't know if it's like work hard, play later, but I know what you're talking about, essentially.
Yeah, like I think that that's very unfortunate because a part of our life is to know pleasure. But it's like, what have we been conditioned to think is pleasure is the point. Taurus is about the simplicity and the slowness of nature and actual life as it is. Pleasure is having the luxury to go to the park today and just sit with the trees because you've accessed your inner resources to the point where you cultivated a life to where you have your needs met and you can recognize your needs are met and cultivate the gratitude to expand that reality, harness it, and maintain it so that you can dictate the way that you spend your days rather than giving all of your energy to an outside resource that you think is your source of sustenance. So I think that that was a part of the whole North Node in Taurus.
Yeah, there's a big expression around ownership, sovereignty, like how we actually engage to pull us. Like I feel like the universe was literally pulling us up to a higher expression of value, right? Like you said, redefining what is valuable. And it's funny because a lot of people do think about pleasure and they think about it in a program context, which is why it had to be balanced with that North Node in Circuit, which was dealing with a lot of what people do think of when they think of pleasure is sensual pleasure. But it's also becoming that taboo pleasure where trauma and pain is now cultivated to feel pleasure in term. And really want to express what I mean by that, like simplify that a bit, because when we go through trauma and we try to normalize it or desensitize ourselves to it so that we can avoid dealing with it, we can literally make expressions of that trauma and recycle that trauma in a way that literally is like skews us to feel that pain as pleasure. So I feel that that access and us moving through those 29 degrees, 30 degrees of energy was really for us to focus on, okay, how do we come into sovereignty? How do we define for ourselves what is value? Because each of us experience specific things to show us in only the way that we could comprehend it through our lives, through our relationships, connections, circumstances, and the things that aligned for us specifically, so that we could know what it was that we needed to value within ourselves and see that reflected externally as well, right? Because it's our capacity and what we attract as far as value, right? You know, people always say you teach people how to treat you. So it's how you value yourself that you're going to be valued, essentially. You put anything out excessively, it loses value, right? Supply and demand. So there's a reason why I don't flood the market with all the diamonds that they have, because all the diamonds would not be valuable at all. It's not like gold. It would literally just not be valuable anymore. So it's the same thing when we think about our sexual expression, right? When the sex becomes something that's just overt, it's sold, it's a commodity. Is it valued? And then how do we restore that value within that paradigm where something has now become excessive and it's now lewd and just like thrown out there? So these are all expressions of that energy. So I feel like that is going to be like a continuation. Like the energy doesn't just end like, okay, we're done with that, now we're in this. It's a natural progression. So now we've progressed and both sides have turned. So the South Node has moved from that Scorpio energy into Libra, Ma'at. And the North Node has moved from Api, that Taurus energy, into fire, from earth to fire, into Aries, Amun, the first sign of the zodiac. So, but it's starting at the last degree because it's moving backwards. So we're always dealing with that last decan of energy, right? And that in itself is also a different progression for us, because we usually move through the energy like in the solar cycles. We move from the 0 degree point to all the way to the 29 and complete the cycle. But now we're starting at 29 and we're moving our way in in order to switch to the next sign. So what are your thoughts on how the energy expresses itself as we move backwards, like us dealing with this latter stage of the Aries moon energy, and how it's like, you know, it's the ram.
So I feel like just like what you were highlighting about the transition, because since we're in the latter degrees of Aries, like all of the Taurus lessons are still going to be integrating for us. I think that now that we've had to reevaluate our own personal value, it's now time to redefine the self, which is a highlight of what Aries really wants to do. Like Aries is the baby of the zodiac. It's the freshness, it's the impulse, it's the first step. It's known in tarot as the fool. Um, the ram wants to charge forward, which is represented for Aries through the ram. And I think that in that impulse, when we follow that impulse, there's a lot of intel that we get about ourselves and the things that we have absorbed into our motherboard when it comes to our association with our identity, and how that requires always coming back to, because the way that we see ourselves determines the way that other people see us. Just like you said, the way that we value ourselves determines the way that other people value us. So I think that a lot of people, or the collective, is going to be retrieving aspects of ourselves that we have left behind in certain connections, which is why the South Node is in Libra. I think that Libra is a very compromising energy, which is in some expressions very beneficial. What?
I said it's the diplomat. Like, we're gonna be diplomatic about it.
Right. It's like, yeah. So it connects from a point of both, and Aries connects from a point of singularity. And both are valuable, and both are useful, and both are necessary for different dynamics. But I think that what is happening is that the collective has to return to the purity of who you actually are beyond your connections. Like, do you know your own spirit? Do you know what is vibrating from within and why you have the impulses that you do? And if you don't, can you allow those impulses to inform where your spirit actually is? Because when we're talking about moving from earth to fire, fire is the initial point of creation. It's the, you have to walk through the fire in order to be reborn. So it is purification. And then Aries is the child fire, it's the youngest fire. So it's the first step that we take towards initiating what we would like to be defined as, which comes with a lot of mistakes, which is why the tarot card associated with Aries is the fool, because you do a lot of foolish things when you're trying to show people who you are rather than knowing who you are. And I think that that is going to be a focal point for the energy, just like seeing the many different ways that we seek external, I don't want to say validation, but validation when it comes to our identity, in the sense of needing a label to feel secure in who you are, in the sense of needing a certain association to know who you are. Like, I think the South Node in Libra is about, Libra's often like, because I'm next to this person, I'm this, rather than like, I'm this because this is who I am, and the people that I'm next to are a reflection of that. Like Libra
Next
people are
sovereignty.
exactly, and I think,
who are you when you stand alone?
Who are you when you stand alone? Exactly, and that goes back to Aries is Mars, and when we're speaking about war, what we're fighting for is our sovereignty. Like that is the essence of everything that's happening right now in our world, in our relationships, in our connection to what we believe in our work. All of it is so that we can be honest about who we are. And I think that the North Node in Aries is going to highlight our ability to be honest, period, when it comes to the things that we actually desire, which I think is something that we struggle with collectively because we want to appease. That's how we.
Yeah, it's really interesting energy dynamic too when you think about it, because I think about how Amun or Aries, because in the Kemetic tradition, Aries is Amun, and it's the ram. And I remember specifically going to the temple of Epiaset, which they call Karnak in Luxor, modern day Egypt. And there's this like trail of all of these statues of Amun, these ram statues. And I remember just like the energy that you actually feel walking into that space. But a lot of people don't recognize that a lot of the things that we created ancestrally, when we built these monuments and these different things, they weren't necessarily to worship a particular personified deity. They were not seen as deities at all. It was literally the science of the energy and the essence of the expression of forces of energy. So that particular force was depicted by the ram. And I think about like how rams, literally like assert themselves with their horns. And that's a way of not only like defending their territory, showing their value when mating, right? But it's like the challenging of that energy. It's like you have to come up against something. And again, coming back to that energy of Mars and that war energy, it's like the purpose you have when something is in opposition to you and the necessity of that. And I think about how what happens when you're doing that to yourself. It's like hitting your head against the wall, essentially. Versus on the opposite side of the spectrum, you're dealing with partnerships, you're dealing with collaborations, you're dealing with connections with others. And that's why when we're looking at the whole paradigm and we're talking about like, yeah, we're going to have to deal with this self-acceptance. We're going to have to deal with, okay, everything that we just learned about our value. How do we actually express that and assert that? Because our moon is an energy that's really has a lot to do with our will. Like you said, it's that fire, it's that young fire, it's the spark, right? So it's the initiation. So the Fool energy is also like you taking that leap of faith, which is why it has to be so light. It's the first sign. So it's like once everything is rendered in that energy of Pisces, it clears the way for a completely fresh start. That's why it is like the Fool is jumping off the cliff. But it's like you could jump off that cliff, you don't know what you're going to land into. And that's essentially the energy that we're being pushed into, is like, okay, now you know your value and you're coming to this whole new expression and space, and you just have to trust yourself. You have to trust everything that you learned, and you have to trust that whatever way that you embody it at this point, you're going to now attract these new experiences and these new connections, these new relationships, in order to see that expressed in real life in practical, tangible ways. And it requires that freedom, right? To like actually have the courage to do that. So I see Amun as a very courageous energy as well. And I think it's also beautiful to think about how it's related to like this particular energy signature, because Libra or Ma'at in the South Node now is also ruled by Venus, Heteru, and that energy is retrograde right now. So I think about how the past, the relationships, because I just talked about like you're going to now attract these new circumstances, relationships, and situations. But like you said, there's some things we left behind in these other relationships. So like Venus is also moving to support us in retrieving whatever we need in order to establish ma'at, right? In order to be in truth, in order to lighten our heart, because that's really what ma'at is all about. It's about the judgment scene, right? The weighing of the heart with the feather of truth. And you want your heart to be light. You want, but not too light, right? Because that's also when you get into that people pleasing mode and you're not moving with your sovereignty and you're not asserting your will and you're not doing what's best for you and what's actually in your heart to do. So that's why these energies always have to tug on one another, and we need both polarities, because that Amun energy is going to keep you from over going into that people pleasing, but that Ma'at energy is going to keep you from going too selfish and self-absorbed in the energy and making the decisions without considering other people. So that's another way to look at how the energies balance themselves.
Yeah, and I just want to uplift what you said about the new connections, because I think, again, what we were saying about how, yes, the South Node is what we have to let go of, but it's really informing the North Node. So we have to move through the South Node to even get to the lesson that the North Node wants to bring. And I think a lot of this South Node in Libra transit is about actually, because Libra is the outside of the relationship and Scorpio is the inside of the relationship. So Libra is about when we talk about the air, it's like, yeah, the mental connection, the things that we exchange. We're talking about Venus, like the things that we could see that we exchange, the things that are similar between us, and all of that. And then Scorpio is about, like the shared trauma, the shared sexuality, the shared resources, all of those things. So when we're talking about Libra, it's about looking at what drives you to connect, because Libra is still a cardinal energy, and cardinal is all about drive. Cardinal is all about taking the initiative, being pushed to take action, to actually make change. That's what Cardinal wants to do. It wants to do something new. It doesn't want to do what's been done before. It doesn't want to maintain anything. It wants to bring a new structure. And depending on the element, that's the tools that it's going to use in order to do so. So when we're talking about Libra, the South Node is going to be asking us to look at these new relationships, or Venus retrograde, look at the relationships of our past and actually see like what has been our of connection, and how does that mirror the truth, like you were saying, who we actually are. And I want to bring this back to the body, just so that people understand, it in a practical way. Aries rules the eyes and the head. So it's our sight, and what we see, and the vision that we have, and how we're going to tread toward that path and make way for it. I think a lot of Aries energy, like you were saying, why the Fool card is the Fool card, is about moving on blind faith. So being able to see a vision within yourself and carry forth that energy without having the support first. It's about believing in yourself. And with the South Node in Libra, it's really about looking at the connections that support that belief. So it's like that access of like, are you, this goes back to, I'm happy that I just remembered that. This goes back to the spiritual warriorship, and the quote that you have in the slide about how during your self-initiation process, you need community to help you transcend the patterns that you're used to. I'm not quoting it accurately, but you need community to help you transcend the patterns that you're used to as far as your previous self-identification. And I think that that's what the South Node in Libra is really asking us to see, like, do you allow yourself and get involved with people that highlight what it is you actually want to be? Or are you used to maintaining like that selfish energy of Aries of like, are you used to just doing things on your own and hiding the parts of you that need to be transformed in relationship or in connection.
Yeah, I think so. With what you just said about the spiritual warriorship, yeah, it's a cycle of ultimately always coming back to your authenticity, which is the key of what you were just describing about how we're now going back into the identity politics. We have to now see who are we outside of the dogma, and like a lot of people are going to have to contend with the way that they're socialized to identify themselves and their desire to be accepted by others and all of these different things, or their fear of being rejected by others, in terms of how true are you being to yourself. Because for a lot of people it is that desire to fit in, or that desire to be in community, which part of it is like just our human nature. Because we're in a degenerate cycle, we don't have a lot of those natural spaces for us to convene and commune. So it's very important right now for us to be developing community, and community has a lot of value, especially spaces where you can actually be authentic. What we like to emphasize as sacred spaces, because the safe spaces are spaces where you're still put into a box, into a container, where so much of you is not allowed to exist, where you now have to censor yourself in order to exist in a safe space, right? So I think it's really important how authenticity is the center of spiritual warriorship, which we will be sharing more about. But I think for anyone who wants to get deeper into that work, like absolutely joining Tehuti Ma'at and just being a part of the community, doing our community connects, doing the Intuit, the healing ciphers, and all the different ways that we connect with each other. All of these things end up coming out innately, like the self-development and the internal work, that all the support that we have around that. But essentially, spiritual warriorship is healed leadership. It's you moving into your most authentic expression of first leading yourself in the world. But innately, we attract those who are here to lead, who are like genuine natural born leaders, who have something to offer and something to birth into the world. And how you still have to be accountable to the collective within what your own personal pursuit is, which is also interesting because we're now rising in this moon cycle that we're in into, we're waxing into a full moon in Hapi. And Hapi, Aquarius, the water bearer, is an emphasis on our unique individuality simultaneously with our collective responsibility and the humanitarian call to change and transform and create revolution, like quite literally. So all of that is all stirring within us right now as we're moving through this energy. So it's just like all this overlaying. But yeah, like we become aware of things, we have to move into a healing process once we become aware of certain paradigms, of certain dynamics and ways, behaviors, things that we want to shift and transform. But as we go through that transformation process and heal that, we do have to unite and connect with others, because we're not living in a vacuum. We're in community innately, despite the circumstances and the situations that we find ourselves in, we are connected to everyone and everything. Like that's an innate aspect of the universe. Like everything is united and everything is connected. Doesn't matter how much programming and how much dichotomizing that we're programmed into, it doesn't change the truth that everything is interconnected and we are in an ecosystem. So that's why we have to be accountable to and considerate of everything else around us in that expression, in that journey to come back around to authenticity. So we unite with others, or we mirror ourselves before we move into action. And then we act from that space of consideration and connection with others, because that also gives you force, that also gives you more power to move into action. And then you show up in a more true whole state, because you're also integrating with other energies that are in alignment with you. So that's essentially what a constellation is. We don't ever just look at an energy as one star. necessarily. I mean, we have our sun, or we have like Septet, but even Sirius, Septet is part of a constellation, Canis Major, the dog star. So it's these bigger systems that we're a part of, that I feel we're being called to see and be exactly who we are truly in the core, at the heart, so that we can contribute in a true whole way to that constellation that we're a part of.
Yeah, and I just want to say, because I think you just put that really beautifully, as far as getting to the core of who we are and highlighting our authenticity, that there's a lot to be treasured in what triggers you in connection as far as returning to that, which is why I think the South Node in Libra is just perfect for that mission that the North Node in Aries has, which is to help us return to authenticity. Is like, yeah, a lot of healing is done in isolation, but ultimately you don't see how far you've come until you're in the face of a person that touches you in the place that no one else can. And that's that mirror that Ma'at has to offer. Like, our biggest karma are our relationships, or is our relationships. The people that we come into communion with, and the way that they activate parts of us that we may not be able to reach ourselves, and how these people ultimately are the divine showing up in our lives to continue to unfold different parts of our story that we may not be able to turn the page to just with our hands alone. Um, so yeah, I think that that's essential. And art with the South Node in Libra. Um, that was something I definitely wanted to touch on, just like everything that we're seeing that's changing with industries, um, like with
Yeah.
the acting and even modeling industry. A lot is happening where people are having to gain sovereignty over their creations and not have this codependent, because I think the South Node in Libra is asking us to release codependent tendencies. And there is, like you said, it's human nature to be dependent upon other people and other things. But I think the South Node in Libra is asking us to be honest about where those codependency comes from. And when it comes to industries, really, honestly, I feel like we be codependent on industries because we don't want to do the work ourselves to cultivate that abundance from our natural gifts amongst each other. We just want there to be some invisible force navigating our careers and giving us paychecks, because that's always been the easiest way to do it, and that's the only way we've known how. So now, what were we going to say?
Seeking stability and seeking validation. So because everybody just did that work in whatever level, on whatever plane you were on, but there's less of that need for outside validation and outside stability, because all the work we just did around orienting our values.
Right. So I think that that is going to be significant in, because Libra is the fine art, it's the fine artist. It's the way that we create beauty in our lives and the way we see beauty. And I just think the value of beauty is that it asks us to intake the moment, and to see ourselves within something external to us, so that we can ultimately come back to that connectiveness that is all that we are. And I think that a huge conversation I can foresee happening with the next 18 months is just like, how do we gain, not control, but how do we take back the will of our own art and what it's saying and why we're doing it and how we go about doing it and who we do it with and where it goes and just how long it lasts, like what's its story, like returning back to timeless art and just the impact that what we create has on the vibratory frequency of the planet and not allowing there to be hidden motives in what we create and the influence it's having on all that we're connected to, like actually getting back to our own reasoning for what we create. I think is a huge part of this access with Aries and Libra. It's about like knowing you can do it alone, but choosing people who want to do what you do rather than, again, like these invisible forces, these industries that are in charge of what you're doing with your energy.
Yeah, because we've been lied to and convinced so that we could be exploited. That our art isn't the valuable thing, or our intellectual property isn't the valuable thing, our creativity isn't the valuable thing. So give it away, put it on TikTok, put it on Instagram, put it on all of these different platforms so that they can build off and sell and sell, sell, sell. And then convince you that now, no, you can sell too. So everybody feels like they need to use social media in order to engage in business. And it's all harvesting our energy and our creativity. So yes, we're being absolutely shifted out of that space so that we can have genuine sovereignty and authority over our creativity. So it's a really powerful time. I'm really looking forward to the next 18 months of us shifting into this energy and how it's going to all, like, on an individual level is one note, but just how we experience it in the collective field is always really interesting.
Yeah,
The way we're sensing it.
yeah.
Is there anything else you want to touch on in closing as we wrap up?
I would just say that I it's important to say that if you hit a point where you don't know who you are, it's okay to stay there. Like, you don't need to rush into identity in order to exist. I know that a part of being human is having a role, um, but I think that a huge part of that self initiation that we're talking about is returning to that empty space of nothing and allowing community to revive you with its mirrors towards a healthy expression of who you are again, and that that's okay, because I do think that that's going to be a theme. And I think that like even like people who do have a lot of Aries energies can experience that, where they have to totally obliterate their idea of who they thought that they were. Like when the North Node is in your energies, it highlights the things that you struggled with your whole life, but compacted within 18 months. So that, and then also just like, there's ways, there's tools to assist with that that we've learned from Taurus, like getting into our bodies, slowing down, valuing stillness, getting into nature, and recognizing that like you literally don't have to continue showing up in character mode. Like that's not what it means to be identified with who you are. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that you said that. I think you said that perfectly. It's just we need to be in that space of pure potential. That is that space. We need to make more space for that. And, making more space to just be quiet, be still, to just receive, to not always try to fill the void, and to not be afraid of the void is really important, because that's where the actual healing is when we fill ourselves from within. And that's what we're all actually moving towards, and what we are actually wanting when we say we want peace, we want serenity, we want tranquility, we want fulfillment. The only way to genuinely create that is from within. So, yes, thank you so much. I want to go ahead and invite everybody who's here. If you want more information about um, us, our spiritual services, there are links in the bio. Danny does astrological readings. So if you actually want Danny to go through your natal chart and not only look at these specific placements with the nodes, but all of the other transits and things that are happening. Do you want to talk about the different types of readings that you do for those who are interested in getting deeper into their own personal astrology?
Yes, absolutely. So, the first reading that I offer is a basic natal chart reading where we're going to look at your energetic constitution, which is essentially the snapshot of the constellation at the moment you were born, which is also a combination of both of your parents' elemental constitution and the way that it expresses itself through you. So, we're going to look at um, the elements that come most naturally to you and also the way that your energy shows up in a space and how to harness that energy for what you would like to manifest in this lifetime, and look at what may be perceived blockages that you're cycling in and how we can develop systems for you to remove those blockages, for you to express your truth. So that's the first offering. The second offering is medical astrology. So essentially, I would look at the energy signatures within your chart and look at how they show up as symptoms and experiences through your body and assess your health and see how we can come back to a balanced state or homeostasis as far as your experience within your body through the elemental structures and harnessing different aspects of herbs and music in ways that the elements show up to bring you back to that balance.
And I also offer my readings as well. I do oracle readings, card readings, which actually just made me pull out the cards because I was like, let's just see whatever the energy is that comes up as we close out this cycle. And also, I already just put up an energy reading for this particular moon cycle that we're in that's going to flow all the way through August 16th. But obviously, when we're tapping into eternity, these energies are timeless. So whenever you connect to a particular reading and cycle, there's something there for you. But I also wanted to also invite those who are interested in joining the Tehutima Militia, who want to be part of our cooperative creative institution and focus on building out other cooperative institutions and being able to do a lot of this self-development work, do a lot of the spiritual healing work, and really step into your purpose, move into accountability, right? All of these things are things that we provide within our community. So you can get more information at tehutima.org/join. So is there any particular intention that you want to have on the card that I pull, Danny? And then for those who are here live, I don't know if you have any other last burning questions. This is your last chance, and we'll answer that question. Ooh, interesting. So the card that is and it's interesting because this is the second card in the reading that I just did that I posted, and it's literally the devourer. So it represents when your integrity is being tried. You need courage to overcome adversity because it's literally an expression of the state of your heart. So I would say that the final message that spirit is pulling through is to stand in your integrity, especially because at the North Node in Ma'at. Ma'at is integrity. Ma'at is honesty. Ma'at is truth. Ma'at is justice. Ma'at is reciprocity, morality, sobriety, propriety, right? I always say you have to use like 10,000 English words for one African concept. And it's really interesting though, because when the heart is engaged with the other, ultimately you're the one who is judging yourself, right? So if your heart is feeling heavy, maybe this is a time where you have to look back at some of those relationships, some of those connections, and find the ways that you need to seruj ma'at, restore ma'at, bring back justice and wholeness to certain situations. So it's not always that we're on the receiving end. Sometimes we're the ones creating the disorder and the dissonance. So I'm going to take that into consideration as well, because I think it's a really powerful message to move into integrity, deepen our integrity. Well, thank you to everyone who was here, who contributed energetically. For those who are watching the replay, thank you again for joining us. Please feel free to leave a comment and let us know what your thoughts are and anything else that you have to share. I'll share. Well, thanks, sis. I admire you.
I admire you. Thank you, beautiful. Everybody have a blessed day.
All right. Power.
Power.